Welcome to the FAFSA Leadership Lounge, where we dive into policy shaping the work of Florida's school leaders. I'm Michelle White, Executive Director of the Florida Association of School Administrators.
And I'm Jessica Janasiewicz, lobbyist for FAFSA and several other school districts here in Florida.
In past episodes, we have certainly talked about train bills moving through session, and you know the type. They usually have a vague title, maybe something simple like an act relating to. And at first glance, it looks straightforward. But in reality, train bills are definitely vehicles lawmakers use to bundle in all kinds of provisions, many of which have nothing to do with the original description.
Exactly. A perfect example from this past 2025 legislative session is HB 1105, or as it is also more formally known as CS for CS for CS for HB 1105. It's simply titled Education, which is pretty broad, right? It sends shivers through the spines of
Yes.
lobbyists when they see a title like that. The bill starts off with what looks like a very specific change. It renumbers and amends a Florida statute that created the Florida Council on the Social Status of Black Men and Boys at the Florida Memorial University. Seems pretty simple and straightforward, but trust me, this bill is just getting warmed up.
Warmed up is right. So from there, it moves into sharing local surtax revenues, making sure that if school districts benefit, charter schools get a proportionate share too. Then it redefines what counts as a school bus. It adds new rules on trespassing arrests and even changes who can apply to start a conversion charter school.
And this is just the beginning. The bill also tweaks the Family Empowerment Scholarship Program's transition to work track, allows certain private schools to build new facilities under specific conditions, and requires that internship opportunities be included in counseling materials. Oh, and then there's another provision that caught my eye. It makes the marching band count towards as either your PE or performing arts credit for high school graduation.
Well, that's interesting for our students, and I'm sure they'll welcome that opportunity to take those credits. Uh, but of course, the list keeps going. So, HB 1105 also changes requirements around certificates of completion. It updated the seal of fine arts and revised eligibility for both Bright Futures and CAPE scholarships. And on top of all that, it created a ban on cell phone use during the school day for elementary and middle school students. So, a pretty big change for classrooms statewide.
And believe it or not, there is still more to this bill. The bill also revises membership of the Florida Able Board of Governors, allows districts to use certain tax revenues to pay for liability insurance, and brings charter schools into the Workforce Development Capitalization Initiative grant program.
Wow. So, to say train bill, it's the perfect example. It left the station as a simple education bill, but along the way, it picked up passenger after passenger, ending as a massive package of education policy changes all under one roof. You're in this a long time. Why are the bills like this?
Well, there are a few reasons. Think of it this way. Just like a train has an engine that has lots of cars attached to it, a legislative train bill starts with one main bill that's moving forward in session. Then lawmakers attach additional bills or amendments, sometimes on completely different topics, as we've seen, so they can all ride along to passage together. Now, why does this happen? Well, legislatures face time limits. In Florida, our time limit is our 60-day legislative session. As a result, not every bill makes it through the process. So if a bill is considered a must pass, maybe like our budget or another critical policy initiative, lawmakers will sometimes add unrelated provisions to that piece of legislation in order to get the other pieces across the finish line. It's a strategy to make sure that certain policies survive, even if they couldn't pass on their own. Of course, these bills are controversial. Supporters say that they're efficient, a good way to package multiple priorities and get business done quickly at the end of session. But critics will argue that they lack transparency because unrelated measures can be tucked into these big bills without much public debate at all. So you may have a bill that was only heard once in committee at the very beginning of committee weeks, never to be heard from again. That next thing you know, at the end of session, it has appeared on this train bill. That's certainly why it can be controversial.
Absolutely. And we know that where you gave that formal name of the bill, that CS for CS, that stands for committee substitute. So at least 3 times a committee made amendments to it along the way, even before it hit the floor.
right.
for both the House and the Senate to make amendments to
That's
again.
right.
So, okay, another thing we want to talk about this week is on the federal level. And government funding is currently scheduled to expire on September 30th. And if no new agreement is reached, a government shutdown could happen. Some of our House conservatives are preparing to support a year long stopgap spending bill, according to Bloomberg Government. These full year stopgaps are rare as they give the White House immense discretion over funding decisions that lawmakers typically would prefer to keep to themselves. So, Jess, talk to us in your experience. How is this potentially going to impact our education world?
Sure. So let's talk about what would actually happen to federal education funding if Congress passed a year long stopgap spending bill. This is also called a continuing resolution or CR, as it's sometimes referred to. Normally, Congress sets education funding levels each year. So things like Title I for low income students, special education, Pell Grants, that sort of thing. A short term CR just keeps the money flowing at last year's levels until lawmakers can reach a new deal. But here's the twist: a year long CR is very rare. If Congress went that route, it would freeze education funding at last year's levels for the entire year. That means no increases for programs that were supposed to grow, no adjustments for inflation or rising enrollment, and no new funding streams that Congress may have planned. Essentially, schools would be stuck with last year's numbers. So, what does that mean for states and our school districts? Well, first, it would give a little stability. At least they'd know that funding is there and they wouldn't have to worry about a shutdown, which could cut off resources completely. But it also means stagnation. Districts that were counting on increases for things like special ed or early childhood programs will not see that. And there's another wrinkle. When Congress punts it with a CR and gives more power to the White House and Department of Education. So lawmakers have not set any new priorities. So the executive branch has much more control over how the money actually gets administered. That could potentially mean changes to how the funds are distributed. So the bottom line is this. And on one hand, schools may get predictability if we have a year long CR, but we wouldn't get any progress and the administration of funds could be impacted. States may have to tighten their belts, districts may delay hiring or expanding programs, and students could feel the effects of this frozen funding in classrooms. So a year long CR avoids some chaos, but it locks in last year's reality. And for education, that means we'd be standing still while the needs, of course, continue to move forward.
And I think all of our administrators, especially this year, can
Mhm.
relate to that federal funding and unknowns, or, hey, we've passed this budget, it was approved, but then having the federal control from the White House and the USDOE certainly caused some issues at
Yeah.
the beginning of this fiscal year. So it's something that we're definitely focused on. I know that our national partners between NAESP, NASSP, and AASA are all strongly advocating for holding on to the funding that we have, but also making sure that a budget moves forward with less wrinkles.
Absolutely.
So that brings us to the end of this week's update. We are so thankful for all of our listeners. We hope you're enjoying season 2 of the Leadership Lounge. Remember to share the latest episodes with your colleagues. It is a great way to just listen and get updates, especially while maybe you're driving to and from school or to the district office. But you can, of course, always visit FASA.net, click on advocacy to see all the things that we're tracking and their current status. So stay tuned for more updates.
Thank you for listening to the Leadership Lounge podcast presented by the Florida Association of School Administrators. Today's podcast was hosted by Michele White and Jessica Genesee. The podcast is produced by Jeff Willoughby. Special thanks to musical director David Higgins. Make sure to subscribe to the Leadership Lounge podcast wherever you find your favorite podcasts. New episodes are released each Monday. For show topic suggestions, questions, or comments, please email communications@fasa.net. We hope you enjoyed the show.